everyone, and welcome and thank you for joining us here for this webinar. This session will provide the details on international climate change policy, its impact on carbon management and CCS, with the latest details coming out of the UNFCCC Bonn Climate Change Conference. We'll be hearing from the Institute's Senior International Climate Change and Policy Lead, Noor Al-Amir, who will be joining us live from the Bonn conference very shortly. So the conference is held every year in Bonn, Germany, and serves as a midway point ahead of COP, with many observers present, including the Global CCS Institute, along with the UNFCCC's subsidiary bodies seeking to move the needle on climate action. So as I mentioned, Nora will provide more details live from the conference shortly. My name is Ruth Gibramidhin. I'm the Strategic Communications Manager with the Institute, and I will be moderating today's discussions. For those who are not familiar with the Institute, we are an international carbon capture and storage think tank whose mission is to accelerate the deployment of CCS, a vital technology needed to tackle climate change and deliver climate neutrality. Next slide, please. So a bit of housekeeping before we begin. This discussion will be 30 minutes. If we have time, we'll take some of your questions, so you could submit those throughout the discussion. You can see the Q&A control panel just below on your Zoom screen there, so please feel free to plug your questions in and we'll take it at the very end. If you miss any part of today's webinar, a recording will be available on our website over the next coming days. So with that, I will introduce our colleague Noor Al-Amir here. So Noor is the Institute's Senior International Climate Change Policy Lead. Welcome, Noor, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ruth.
So for those who are not familiar with the Bonn Climate Change Conference, maybe you can provide a bit of a primer before we kind of dig into it. Who attends? Why is it important? Yeah, any background?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Thank you, Ruth. So the Bonn Climate Change Conference is essentially the mid-year checkpoint for global climate action. It's hosted by the UNFCCC Secretariat, and it's headquartered in Bonn in Germany. And think of it as an engine room for global climate diplomacy. It's where the kind of scaffolding gets constructed for the final political deals that happen later in the year. So we have negotiators from 195 countries that are party to the UNFCCC. So these include technical experts and diplomats. And then we also have what we call as the observer constituencies, so NGOs, and that's how we attend as the Global CCS Institute. So NGOs, business groups, indigenous representatives, youth activists, researchers, etc. And the Bonn matters because this is where the real technical work gets done. The big political moments and headline announcements happen at COP. But here in Bonn, it's a much more intimate setting. Negotiators from all the countries are actually hammering out the detailed frameworks, legal texts, and technical mechanisms that will hopefully make or break the deals when we get to Belém.
Yeah. You mentioned the countries. So a component of the process is NDC, so the national determined contributions. Could you provide us maybe a bit of an update with how those are progressing amongst the countries? Anything interesting that we can look forward to and seeing within those NDCs?
Yeah, absolutely. So submissions have been trickling in ahead of COP30. So we have been seeing, the deadline was in February, but we haven't seen, the NDCs from really critical countries like China and India yet, as well as others. But there are some, there is some encouraging news specifically for carbon management for CCS and CDR, where we're seeing new countries explicitly including CCS in their updated NDCs. So, for example, Botswana has included CCS in their power sector plans. This is the first for them. We also have Switzerland, which have made a concrete commitment to capturing and permanently storing 13 to 14 million tons from hard to abate residual emissions. And then we also have Uruguay, who are specifically targeting the cement sector with CCS deployment. So these are quite specific sectoral commitments that have been communicated by these countries, and we're looking to hear more from them. From a wide angle view, though, current NDCs collectively are still not enough to meet our climate goals. So we're still, tracking towards kind of the above the 2 degrees of warming. But what is genuinely game-changing is this focus on investable NDCs. So I was at a side event yesterday, and we heard from a $65 trillion asset manager who have developed specific principles on how governments should communicate opportunities in their NDCs. So this matters because investors need sectoral roadmaps on how how to kind of need a pathway from national commitments to bankable projects. So they gave an example from Japan, which have developed a comprehensive sector decarbonization roadmap supporting their NDC, targeting power, steel, cement, and other industries, and it helped them raise 1 trillion yen for their green transformation program. So that catalyzed both public and private investment. So um, but I would also say, just linking this to the global stock take, which was agreed in Dubai 2 years ago, there's also a real opportunity for NDCs to include quantitative indicators responding to paragraph 28. So that's where the paragraph that mentions CCS, particularly in hard to abate sectors, and the IEA, through their analysis, have found that countries are already reflecting paragraph 28 in their NDCs, especially 28A, renewables energy efficiency. However, 28E is also being mentioned, which is the CCUS paragraph. So that's a bit of a roundup on NDCs.
Oh, that's great. I think we'll keep an eye on that. Of course, that's going to be like an ongoing conversation, but with broad, I guess more broadly with Bonn. So it's about 2 weeks, and the agenda was kind of set out earlier in this week. So what are the key items, I guess, for the next week? We have a couple more days left. How is the presidency, I guess, framing things over the next couple of days? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, Brazil released their fourth letter to the international community just this morning. So they're bringing a new energy to these negotiations. And what they said today was that they're treating the global stocktake findings not just as recommendations, but as a globally determined contribution, which is a very big boost for carbon management, CCS. It's mentioned right there. So they're saying that this is something all stakeholders, governments, businesses, civil society must implement together. And I think just generally speaking, the Brazilian presidency has been primarily focused on forest adaptation and climate finance. However, they have also announced an action agenda around 6 thematic areas. And for our sector, the most relevant being transitioning energy, industry, and transport thematic, where they're specifically calling for accelerating zero and low emission technologies in hard to abate sectors. So it's kind of interesting how they're framing this. Um, but I will say that climate finance still remains a central challenge. So the presidency also, with the Azerbaijan presidency, has launched consultations this week, specifically for the Baku to Belem roadmap to scale up 1.3 trillion annually by 2035. And during these consultations, we actually heard from Saudi Arabia, who's intervened calling for more funding for CCS for developing countries. And that's a significant statement because it shows how carbon management and CCS is moving into mainstream climate finance discussions.
Yeah. And I guess with respect to the IPC's reporting cycles, have we come up to that already? What's that looking like? And are there any
Yeah.
updates there?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll just backdrop this with a bit of information about the IPCC, which is basically the scientific body that assesses the science related to climate change that the policymakers use. So the IPCC is in a quite an interesting transition moment right now. So they're on their 7th reporting cycle, and they've agreed to the structure with the synthesis report due by late 2029. But there's a challenge on the timeline, and there's a deadlock actually going on in the negotiations. Some countries, so why is it such a problem? Countries want the IPCC input to go into the second global stocktake, which is a 5-year process, which concludes in 2028. But then some countries are worried that this rush in the timeline will compromise their ability to participate, and will affect the quality of the science in the report. So it is significant for our sector, especially the 7th reporting cycle. I mean, it was announced over a couple of years ago, I think now, that there's the methodology report on a year and a half ago, the methodology report on carbon dioxide removal and CCUS. So this was a big moment showing that these technologies are considered core climate solutions, not just kind of nice to have technologies. Um, I will say that Professor Oliver Gedden is here. So he's the sort of lead scientist on the CCS aspect of the seventh reporting cycle. And in conversations we had with him here, he indicated that CCS will have a significant role in the climate models, especially for the cement sector. And the IPCC chair, Jim Ski, was also, this actually prompted Jim Ski himself to talk about a broader discussion of how CCS should be featured in cross-sectional chapters as well. So the outlines for the IPCC report are on the website if folks want to have a look at that. I'll also just mention the 17th Research Dialogue happened on June the 17th, where we heard from scientists. They kind of drilled deeper on CDR, and they concluded there's still more work needed to understand carbon dioxide removal. And there's a summary report that will come from the SAPSTA chair, which is the scientific and technology body here. And we also had a kind of a poster session at the in the lobby for the delegates to have a look at just on CDR. We've also been hearing about CDR in the side events. Senegal mentioned CDR, specifically noting that needs science, more financing, monitoring, capacity building. GIZ Germany is also actively discussing the technology. So it's really showing how CDR is moving into the more policy kind of realm increasingly.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that it's Bonn is the midway point ahead of COP, and I suppose, of course, also follows the COP that just passed. So, what items from COP 29 tied to, I guess, CCS and carbon management do you expect to be picked up at Bonn? So, the 4-year work plan on response measures, for example, do we see any movement on that? The mitigation ambition and implementation work plan. Is there anything from the last COP that you're seeing being picked up now?
Yes, so the mitigation work program is quite contentious. So actually, parties have been sharing views on how to make the mitigation work program what they call a safe space to overcome barriers and find actionable solutions. There's a lot of divergence when it comes to the mitigation work program. It's really kind of the crux of this is whether the mitigation work program should be sending political signals on mitigation ambition and whether it should be imposing new commitments on countries. And this is really relevant for carbon management because the key kind of paragraph that is mentioned is that GST paragraph 28, and it's kind of linking that to the mitigation work program and how to kind of do that. But there is a lot of divergence and resistance there. But I will say that there's also a digital platform to share mitigation projects that's also being negotiated and discussed, and how that will look like and the purpose of it. So this will be an opportunity for the CCS community and governments, as well as businesses and stakeholders, to publish various things on the technology. On response measures, so this is, I mean, maybe let me backdrop this with trade because I think this trade measures is causing a lot of diplomatic friction and it's affecting response measures. And I think the negotiations generally, there was a sort of a delay in the adoption of the agenda in the first 2 days because of trade measures and climate finance as well. But there is a very strong pushback against the carbon border adjustment mechanism of the EU, the CBAM, and other so-called unilateral trade measures coming from the developing countries. So the EU is feeling increasingly isolated on this issue with intensifying pressure from the G20 and BRICS countries. So this really comes to the heart of how we manage industrial competitiveness when it comes to climate change. I'll just also mention tech. So on technology mechanisms, there was this renews every 5 years, and we need to renew that in Belém. So there was positive responses from countries to continue the technology mechanism and the Climate Technology Center and Network. So this is very positive news. How this fits into the new UN reform agenda and the wider kind of what's happening at play there is yet to be seen. But it's really crucial for carbon management because it determines how technology transfer and capacity building can be supported, particularly for developing countries that need both technical expertise and financing mechanisms.
A hot topic over the last couple of weeks and months have been Article 6, conversations around that, speculation. Is there any progress with carbon management technologies that relates to Article 6? Anything you can speak to?
Yes, so maybe I will clarify a bit more about, in case I'm not sure the viewers, but just for the sake of everyone, let me just clarify. When we say Article 6, we're talking usually about Article 6.2, which covers kind of bilateral or multilateral arrangements between countries, and then Article 6.4, which is a centralized crediting mechanism handled by the supervisory body where international methodologies are developed and approved. So let's start with 6.4. There's been extensive historical work on CCS projects from previous mechanisms like the Clean Development Mechanism. So we're not starting from scratch here. There is a foundation that the community can build on. So over the next year, we expect to be able to submit new and updated methodologies to the supervisory body. At the moment, we haven't reached the stage where we're talking specifically on technological CDR and those things, but we're hoping that in the coming year we'll be able to submit some methodologies. It's really critical timing because the methodologies and frameworks that will be developed now will determine project viability for the next decade. So if we don't get the measurement, reporting, and verification frameworks right, the CCS projects will find it difficult to access the carbon market financing. So that's on 6.4. 6.2, I think many might have already seen in the news the Norway-Switzerland bilateral agreement that was signed as part of the Longship launch event in Oslo. So this is very significant because it establishes it's under Article 6.2. So it establishes a legal framework for cross-border transport and storage of CO2, as well as the transfer of mitigation outcomes between the two countries. So this is actually the first agreement of its kind between two industrialized countries under Article 6.2, where they're cooperating to achieve their NDCs. So this isn't just government to government. A coalition of companies we've also seen have already announced pilot project activities under this bilateral framework. So it's creating actual commercial projects. And it really just demonstrates how Article 6 can accelerate shared CCS infrastructure development and how countries with, significant emissions and capture capabilities can work with countries with, ideal geological storage potential. So, my advice is to watch these Article 6 negotiations very closely, especially in the next few months, because it will determine the support for CCS deployment for many years.
Yeah. And what other opportunities are you seeing there? So are there any other, let's say, promising international agreements or relationships that have been built over the last few years, or any platforms that maybe these countries can leverage, perhaps at Bonn or otherwise, to kind of build on those relationships tied to carbon management? Yeah. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah. I mean, I think just to reemphasize the Longship project, which is designed as open infrastructure, and how this will come to play in the UNFCCC as a case study, and how this, how other countries will see this as an example is yet to be seen for the CCS community. So I'll say that. And then, of course, the Carbon Management Challenge, my other hat as coordinator for that challenge. So we're continuing to build momentum. So that includes 23 participating governments. So there is the annual ministerial roundtable that happens every COP. So hopefully we'll have one as well in Brazil, which we're working on. And we're seeing, more countries willing to work together on shared challenges. This is also complemented by the Gigaton by 2030 campaign under this MMI initiative. And so there is a partnership happening between, CMC and SEMMI and Gigaton through the Gigaton by 2030 campaign. There's a webinar actually in next week or the week after, actually. So it does mean that there is just increased international cooperation more generally for carbon management.
And just before I head to the next question, if there's any questions we have from the audience, please do not hesitate to plug them in. I think, of course I can monopolize the time with Nora, but, feel free to leverage the chat box. We will be wrapping things up in about 5-10 minutes. So just want to give a little reminder to our audience there. Nora, so you mentioned the countries, so that's very exciting. Carbon Management Challenge, we're also keeping an eye with that. 20 plus countries is definitely promising. Constituencies are also a major component of Bonn and the UNFCCC process. We see a lot of organizations and observers within that. Bingo, Youngo with the youths, of course. And so how is that, how are they tackling conversations around carbon management? Are they familiar with it? Are they also supporting, I guess, the causes? There are more learnings that need to be socialized within the constituencies themselves. And of course, feel free to provide a primer on the constituencies as well.
Yeah, sure. So the Global CCS Institute, we're part of the Business and Industry NGO group, so it's called Bingo. And the Bingo group do an excellent job. It's led by the International Chamber of Commerce. So they help provide access to various meetings with key players. And there's general, awareness about CCS, and it's important within the Bingo group and the community there. And it has, a very technical community of industry representatives and, growing recognition for these technologies. And the investment community is particularly engaged here. So this also brings another opportunity for CCS. So I will say civil society groups, such as the environmental NGO groups, women and gender group, even the youth group, they do remain skeptical about the technology, and it's still, voiced in different ways. So this is still there, but I will say that in the Carbon Management Challenge, Workstream 3, countries are looking towards, how to better communicate carbon management and try and build bridges between technical experts and, civil society representatives as well as governments.
Great. And so Bonn is sorry, not Bonn, rather COP is in uh, not too far away, a couple of months now. What should we watch for on the road to COP 30, and how can stakeholders get involved? I
Yeah,
know you just
sure.
constituencies, of course,
Yes.
if there's anything else.
Yeah, so I think what to watch out for on the road to COP, there's a few things happening this year. So I think first the NDC submission pipeline is critical. So we're expecting to see, we're expecting the commitments from major players like China, the EU, and India. So this will fundamentally shape the ambition level for COP 30. There's also a checkpoint at the UN General Assembly in September in New York, where these NDCs will be reviewed and synthesized. So we'll really understand the global ambition gap there, if there is one, and what needs to be addressed in Belém. And we also have London Climate Week next week. So for those in London and those traveling to London, there's the Business Breakthrough Barometer launch, which will provide crucial data on private sector engagement and investment flows. And then when it comes to the presidency, the Brazilian presidency have announced for stakeholders something called the Global Muatrao Framework, which is a platform for stakeholder engagement to contribute to to influence the COP30 agenda. So it's something we're not sure how this will look like yet, but there will be basically an inclusion of stakeholders through a framework that the presidency is launching. And then, of course, we have this MMI in Busan, the Clean Energy Ministerial and Mission Innovation. So this is where countries will we'll meet together on a ministerial level. Yeah, the Get Done by 2030 campaign is also linked to this. We also have interesting players who have other global presidencies. So Canada is the G7 president this year. So we're hoping for something there on carbon management. There's also activity happening in the BRICS groups and G20, which through the Carbon Management Challenge we're also actively supporting. Um, so so yeah, I mean, I would say that, when it comes to COP30, what's important is the window that we have now, where decisions are being made, and hopefully we get to the high level political moments, and where decisions can become reality, hopefully.
Yeah, looking forward to it. We have a few minutes left for questions, and we can wrap up here. There's a question here that asks, what policy mechanisms are proving most effective for incentivizing private investment? And I guess you can maybe even broader, how can private sector get involved as well? But if there's any specific mechanisms that can support them? How can they do so?
So I'm not a climate finance expert, so I would have to revert this question to climate finance, or sorry, rather finance experts. But I will say this, when it comes to public finance, one of the key things is, private finance is not always, at least in the civil society groups, there's a lot of focus on public finance and the need for public finance and not to divert to private finance. So there is this atmosphere where um, governments as well as civil society really want there to be public financing when it comes to climate mitigation and adaptation. So this will go through the Green Climate Fund, and I think many of you already know that Trinidad and Tobago was the first country to access a CCS related project activity for its a readiness activity through the GCF. But yeah, when it comes to private financing, we're hearing a lot in the Baku to Belém roadmap from development banks as well, and they're also proposing some different ways to overcome this issue.
Right. Yeah, so we have a couple more days left at Bonn. So I suspect after Bonn concludes, you'll be providing a summary or brief that people can maybe watch for at the end of it all, just to get more intel and more insights from your end. And we'll definitely publish and circulate that to all of those who are keeping an eye out and wanting to see how this concludes. So thanks, Noura, for all your insights, and yes, good luck over the next coming days. We're keeping an eye out for the how the Bonn conference unfolds. And thanks to our audience for joining us, but unfortunately that is all the time that we have. As I mentioned in the beginning, there will be a recording of this webinar available on our website in the next coming days. And if you'd like to read more about CCS and international policy, do head to our website. You can just find those under resources. Noura has authored a few publications tied to some of the things that she's touched on today. So there was a report on carbon management and NDCs that we published not long ago. There's a report on key COP29 outcomes that unpacks some of the mechanisms that we spoke about today. So head over there and you can download those publications for free. If you're on social, follow us at Global CCS Institute is our handle on LinkedIn. And if you have any other questions, you can contact us directly at info@globalccsinstitute.com. Thank you.